Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart. High Elf Realms for Warhammer the Old World are well and truly on pre-order now, and Games Workshop very kindly sent me in advance a Lord of Chrace. So let's get this built and painted.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Counter-Attack Bases. They stock a wide range of counters, gaming aids and movement trays for multiple game systems, and offer custom items to suit your club, your event, or even your podcast or YouTube channel. Check out the link in the video description. So High Elf Realms are here. I've reviewed the book. I've even painted an Illyrian Reaver. If you haven't seen those already, do check out links in the video description for those. But now it's time to paint the new Resin Lord of Chrace. But before we do that, let's have a very quick look at the miniature. So this is a Forge World resin miniature, the new formulation resin they've been using for a couple of years now. It's great, really super crisp detail. You usually get little instructions inside. The little red areas show where you trim away flash, yellow where you glue. You need to use super glue. Most of them you can just trim off using your normal clippers. They are quite brittle, so you need to be careful. So I would always trim the smallest areas first. If you're unsure whether it might break, snip a little bit further away from the miniature and then trim it off and file afterwards. You can file and scrape with your blade as you would normally do so for any plastic miniature. All I'll say is it is a little bit more brittle, so any really fine detailed areas, take your time. Don't go in too heavy and use sharp blades, fresh things. If the miniature is slightly bent or out of shape, you can use a hairdryer or hot water to get it back into shape as well. Sometimes that will happen after casting with resin. So if you see like a bent spear pole, or in this case an axe handle, don't worry, a little bit of hot water, hairdryer, bend it back into shape, cold water again, and it will set in place. You do need super glue for these. You can't use standard plastic glue. Most hobbyists have them anyway, but it's definitely more of an advanced kit. Not something that you maybe would give to a 10-year-old or something to do as their first miniature, whereas you could probably get away with some of the more modern plastics. But once you're done, you end up with really crisp, beautiful miniatures, and I'm a big fan of this one. I love the pose. It's quite simple in so many ways, but I've been excited to paint this for quite a while. So I started off with a black prime, as I usually do for most of my miniatures. Very rarely use a different colour, and then it's on to preparing it with the zenithal. So it's greystone blue and model air white, and this is the method I've been using for all of the high elves I've been doing recently. The reason for the greystone blue, which is really a kind of bluish grey colour, is because it's a perfect base for any white, and we have a lot of white in the studio style paint schemes for high elves, and I'm using that for all the high elves I paint as well. Now there's a lot of red and gold on this miniature as well, because it's Thracian rather than the standard high elf armies or Sea Guard or something like that. But I'm still building up a really nice thin layer of this greyish blue, mostly top down, so I can capture some of the black in the recesses, giving me some really good shadows to work with later on. And after that, I'm going in with white as well through that airbrush. Again, focusing from the top down for an awful lot of it to try and keep that shadowed area, and then focusing on the areas that are going to be white or they're going to be red to give them a little bit of extra light boost. So when I glaze over the top, that shows through and again takes a lot of the work out. And then I like to finish off with a dry brush, and I'm using White Scar here, and this is a dry brushing palette. Work the excess off, hardly anything on my brush at all. And what I'm trying to do here is pick out the detail. I'm not going over all of the flat areas of the miniature. I've got so little paint on there. I don't want to ruin the nice smooth white that I've just put on there. Really am picking up all that detail on the fur here, on the hair, that kind of thing. And what we're left is something that looks extremely white to you on the screen right now because of the way the camera blows it out, but it's fairly grayscale in a lot of areas, lots of shadows still in there, and that will be great now because we're going to use lots of contrast paints. We're starting off with a Pilar Glacier contrast paint, which is extremely low pigment, and if you've seen my other high elf tutorials over the last couple of weeks, you'll have seen this as well. So I'm using it as a way of shading the white on all of my high elves, and it's perfect. It gives you that lovely blue tint to the shadows, to the recesses, and what I'm doing here now is essentially recess shading, making sure I'm keeping away from those nice flat white areas where I want it to be at the lightest. I've already got that almost that top highlighting with the airbrush. So I'm just filling in the recesses. And then once that is done, I'm moving on to Flesh Tearers Red. I quite often use Blood Angels Red, but I wanted something a little bit darker and richer here. So I'm just picking out the edging just the same way as it is on that studio paint scheme. Now, I've only seen the pictures that you guys have seen at this stage on the press releases and on the box art. While I'm painting this, they're not up on the website, so I'm not able to look at the 360 and see what they've done behind, but I'm focusing on the image that I have seen of the miniature from the front. So I'm mostly copying the studio scheme, but I will make some subtle changes. So just slowly working my way around, trying to be neat, because I want to protect all of the areas that need to be white still, or this sort of zenithal stroke slap chop-esque style that I use underneath. So I'm being a little bit careful here. It doesn't really matter if I get the colours on anywhere, it'll be metallic, but I do want to keep it off the areas that are white and that is fur. So just filling in the inside of the cloak red here. I can't remember which way round it is on the studio scheme now as I'm rabbiting away recording this voiceover, but I'm just being careful to try again and keep that red off anywhere that's likely to be white or fur later on. Little bit tricky to get to certain areas on this miniature. It's quite hard to do in sub-assemblies you could do. Now we move on to Sanguine Scarlet and Demon Red, and they're going to be my highlights for the base red that we've put down with that contrast Flesh Tearers Red. And for the front here, it's really, really simple. Just some thin lines, leaving a little bit of that Flesh Tearers Red in the recesses, so it starts to make that colour pop a little bit more. You have these little areas of red that are in the sort of armour patterns on the side, and of course we've got all those strands of fur on the horsehair at the top. So again, I'm just using the side of my brush a little bit here to highlight those rather than trying to keep a steady hand and paint down that whole strand. If you use the side of your brush, it gives you enough control and you're not getting any paint anywhere you don't want it. As we get onto that top highlight, it's just an even thinner line leaving each of the previous red showing. Very, very subtle here. There's not an awful lot of red showing at all. And as we get to the cloak, we're just lifting the colour slightly, adding a little bit of an edge highlight to the sides and not worrying too much about what we can't get to or can't see. So this is contrast Agarash Dunes, and I think it's going to be a perfect base for this kind of off warm yellow for the fur of the lion. A very sort of cartoon-esque lion, but that works perfectly for this kind of miniature. Skeleton Horde could be used, but it's maybe a little bit too low in pigment, so you may need a couple of coats. But this just worked out perfectly. The detail is really bold at the moment because of that dry brush I did as well. And this is just going over it perfectly. So a nice, neat, even coat, trying to make sure that it's only settling in the recesses, you've not got too much pooling on the top. We are going to come back and do lots of highlighting on this afterwards, so this is very much just a starting point. When I apply it to the back, you can see all of that detail starting to come through, so I'm just working that contrast paint around, allowing it to pool just enough, but not too much that it stains some of those flat areas and makes it harder to highlight later on. Because when you highlight contrast paint, you want to enhance what's already there rather than having to completely paint over it if you can avoid it. The highlight stages, I'm bringing in Ivory Tusk and Trooper White now. We'll start by mixing the Ivory Tusk with the Agarash Dunes on the wet palettes of 50-50, and it brings enough of the Agarash Dunes colour in but lightens it enough. Now it's a case of spending quite a bit of time slowly building it up. So focusing on the raised areas, filling those in and lightening it slightly, and then slowly adding less and less of the Agarash Dunes, keeping the paint quite thin so you don't have big, thick brush marks on the miniature, and then slowly building towards white at the ends. This is probably one of the longest parts of painting the miniature, but it was quite fun as well. It seemed to work. Sometimes you paint something that takes a long time, but it's quite pleasing. The colours worked on the palette. Building up to white was quite nice, and I could see as I was doing it that it was the colour I had in my mind. So when it's working as well, that always makes you feel a little bit happier about processes like this. But this miniature was relatively quick to paint. After that, I got Iron Jaws Yellow with my Agarash Dunes, and I did a 50-50 mix and added a little bit of water just to build up a little bit of a glaze. I didn't put it all over the whole fur cloak, but just added it in certain recesses just to give a little bit of variation. The claws and the nose on the lion were really simply just some black leader and contrast paint, and I did nothing else with them. because of the strong white underneath. It gave them a little touch of a highlight. You could have gone back with a grey or something like that, but once I finished painting the miniature, it didn't really feel like it needed it. And then the same flesh method I've been using for all my high elves. So Guilliman flesh, Shige purple and Vulpus pink. And then we add in some elven flesh from Tootling Coats afterwards. And again, I'll repeat the process, but I'm sure a lot of you have seen the recent videos. But over the zenithal white prime, the Guilliman flesh is just perfect. Nice even coat, runs in the recesses. And when you can only see such a small amount of flesh in the face like that, you could almost leave that, if I'm honest with you. Same with over the hands as well. Nice even coat, so it runs in between the fingers, and you get this really nice looking flesh effect. However, to make it look a little bit less basic, we're going to be using the purple on that runs in as a way of adding shadow. So I tend to use that around the cuff where the armour is adding a little bit of shadow to the hand, around the eyes, around the edges of the helmet where they're providing shadow on the skin there. Not too much, and the paint's relatively thin, but put it in the eye sockets, that really quite helps. Then after that, the Vulpus pink is 50-50 with water, just thinned, and I apply it over the lower part of the face, over the lips, sometimes the nose as well. It just adds a little bit of warmth and gives you extra variation. It's also great in between the fingers and sometimes on the tops of the hands. So you've got that Guilliman flesh as the main sort of colour, a little bit of red for the warmth, and then a little bit of the purple colour for that darkest colour. Now I do the eyes usually at this point just to touch up and make sure they're okay, and then I go back with that elven flesh and just make it pop by adding the tip of the nose, the chin in this case. If it's a bigger model, maybe the cheekbones as well. Pick out the knuckles, thin the paint so it's not too sort of bright and garish. It's really simple skin, but it looks pretty good. Here we have Sigil Brown, Boarhide and Fur Cloak, and I'm using these as a bit of a triad. I haven't used this colour combination on the High Elves yet. I use it a lot on the Empire I've been doing. But again, it's not the Sea Guard or it's not the standard Elves. There's more reds and things in this miniature, so I feel like I can add a darker brown. So we're using that as the leather on the handle of the sword. I use it on the scabbard as well, which is mostly hidden underneath the cloak. And then also the shaft of his big axe here. After that Sigil Brown contrast is dry, we're using the other two colours as a two-stage highlight. So on the handle of the sword, you've got detail there, so we're literally aiming at those raised parts and leaving that Sigil Brown in the recesses. Quite simple to start with. Obviously you need a thinner line when you go back for your second highlight. For the axe handle, I'm focusing up the top of the miniature where that light would hit and almost leave it completely dark underneath. I do wet my brush a little bit and feather and blend it out a little bit. And then again, the same thing for that top highlight, focus a little bit more on the centre and a slightly thinner line. Two metallics this time, and if you've watched a lot of my High Elf tutorials recently, you'll see that I've been using three, but I'm using Surcoat Silver and Mithril Blade here. And there was a middle colour, but I'm cutting out the middle man, so to speak, on this one. It was such a subtle transition between those three colours, it probably wasn't always needed, and as this miniature has so much gold on it, that I thought it definitely wasn't needed here at all. So I'm just building up this paint quite slowly. It's nice and bright because it's going over a white colour anyway, and that works perfectly for High Elves. If you watch a lot of my tutorials, you'll have seen me very often starting with a metallic sort of copper colour underneath my iron, and the reason for doing that is because it makes it look really sort of grimy and dirty sometimes and adds to the depth, but I don't want that with High Elves at all. I want it to look a little bit brighter, so this is just a perfect starter colour. As I already mentioned, there is quite a lot of gold on this miniature, so I can leave a lot of this now. It doesn't matter though if it goes over the area, that there will be some gold because the gold will cover it, no problem at all. But I am taking care not to get it on my red or my white or my fur. Problem with metallics, even if you're very, very quick and you quickly get a clean brush and wipe it away if you get it somewhere you don't want it, sometimes it just leaves that kind of residue that the metallic paints do, and you get some of those metal filings there and it messes it up. So I start to add in the highlights, and they are very, very subtle, and they will be slightly accentuated later on when I add a bit of an oil wash in. It just adds a little bit more definition, but just focusing in the centre of the panel on the top there, and when it comes to the sort of leg greaves there, just down that sharp edge at the front and the sharp edges over the feet as well, it just makes it pop a little bit more and stand out. For the gold, I'm using Viking gold and Dwarven gold, which is different to the gold that I used on the other High Elves. I wanted this to be more of a warmer gold and have orangey sort of tones to it to try and match the the box art really, or at least be closer to it. I quite often can go for a necro gold from the same scale colour range, but this seemed to match quite well, and as soon as I started applying it, I realised I made the right choice, because it's very close to that same sort of style that's on that box art. Having to be quite careful at this stage, because most of the miniature now is coloured in, so to speak, apart from those gold areas. So we really are having to be careful to only get the paint where you want it. So just taking my time a little bit here, especially when we get to the armour that's over his hips. We've got all of that red inlay. So I'm going to be very careful not to get the paint over those areas that I've already finished painting. And there's just loads of little bits of extra detail. We've got bits on the big axe itself. We've got the armor. You've got little things dangling down from the back of the third cloak over the white cloak as well, that hold those gems, which look great with gold rims around them. So we've got to paint those in as well. And again, just spending a lot of time making sure that I don't mess up and get that metallic paint onto that nice finished white. There's even an elven rune design that's dangling down the back of the lion's fur cloak, and I decided to paint the trim or the edging on the outside of the cloak in gold. And again, I think the studio paint job, that's in red. You can only see part of it from that front end shot, but I really wanted it to look gold and have a bit of a tie-in to the other miniatures that I've been painting already, in case I have a Thracian element to my army at any point. I wanted that cold white to sort of tie the army together. But we're very much building up the highlight layers now with the dwarven gold, which is that little bit lighter, and just focusing in where the light catches the most, leaving that darker gold into the recesses. A little bit edge here, a little bit of where the light would hit at the top on that part, and just slowly adding a little bit more, looking at it, checking it, knowing I'm going to add an oil wash later anyway. I wasn't happy that it was bright enough, so I decided to reach for the elven gold as well, also from this scale colour range, and just added a little bit, and not all over, just where the light would really catch the most. So right on the tip of the back of that sort of pommel area on the back of his axe, right on the top of the shiny helmet as well, just to really get a little bit of an extra transition between that sort of warmer orangey to base colour and where the light would be shining right at the top, and I think it was worth it. And turning to technical Spirit Stone Red for all of those gems, and I've done this with the other miniatures that I've been painting for this range. Just keeps it really, really simple. I've generally gone back and painted the centre with a bright silver, because it shows through underneath a little bit better. And I just like this paint, and makes it easier. Yes, it probably does look better if you spend the time to paint each individual gemstone and highlight between each layer with a little dot of white in the corner. But this is army painting at the end of the day, and I want it to look striking, and I'm saving time at this point. So this is a ready mixed oil wash called Grease from Soilworks from Scale Colourals Scale 75, and regular viewers of the channel will have seen this quite a lot. And I'm just using this as my wash, and it's perfect over the gold because it's got a lot of sepia tones in there. It's a bit like a pin wash here. I'm allowing it to run into all of the detail, which it does really, really nicely, because oil washes tend to do that. And the beauty of it is I can clean it away afterwards as well and remove it from any of the flat surfaces, making sure I'm using an old brush here. So if you do see this and go and order it and you've not used oil paints before, you do want to use separate brushes from the ones that you normally do. So as long as it's got a decent enough point on it still, use one of your older brushes. And once I've added that to all of the armour, including the steel coloured armour as well, using a little bit of AK thinner here, this is artist stuff as well, doesn't smell too bad. Same brush that I've cleaned off, dip it in the thinner, and I can just go back over and remove any of that oil wash which is settled on the flat surfaces. You're wiping it away again, which is something you couldn't do with an Agrax Earthshade or something like that. You do want the oil wash to dry before you do that, so you can whack it with a hairdryer, not literally whack it, but whack a bit of hot air on it with the hairdryer, or leave it a couple of hours, and that will generally be enough on a smaller miniature like this. And when it does dry, it shades the recesses brilliantly, looks really, really good. And you can just take this away from the centre, and you get this lovely extra tone to your metallics. I just love doing stuff like this with oil paints. Now it's kind of optional extra time. This is White Star, which is the kind of pure, brilliant white. And I'm just going back and adding a very subtle highlight to that white we did way back with the airbrush. It's so pure and clean, you don't really have to, but just to make it pop a little bit more, going back and adding a little edge highlight to the bottom of the cloth at the front, a little line to make it really pop on those sort of vertical parts. I might also add a little bit to the edge of the white trim that goes around the mail armour at the sides. And then you can also look at the back of the cloak as well, and I did a little line all the way along the bottom using the side of my brush, and that helps as well, just to really make it stand out and look that little bit cleaner. But you don't have to do this. Then at that stage we are done. I haven't talked through the basing. If you are interested, drop a comment below, but a nice rim on the base and he is all finished. Time to look at some proper pictures. After painting the Illyrian Reaver, which I had loads of fun doing, but it was quite time consuming. It was one of those just took ages because of the horse as well and getting into all the different detail. While there was hidden detail here, a lot of it was just so hidden you didn't really need to get to it. And it's actually painted up quite quickly. I think the whole miniature took me about 4 hours in total. And yes, it's not going to win any golden demons, but I think it looks pretty striking as a character on the tabletop, and the real punchy reds and that white doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and that because the lion fur came out okay, I think it's worked quite well, and I could see doing a few more illustrations now. I've always looked at the lion fur and thought it might be a bit of a pain, but I've found a method here that works and I'm happy with, and maybe I'll look to do more in the future. Definitely fun, really enjoyed this. Out of all of the high elf miniatures I've painted in the last couple of weeks, I probably had most just general painting enjoyment for this one. It looked like it was going in the right direction when I was doing it all the way through. Rather than swearing at it or being frustrated, it seemed to be going well. Apart from snapping off the handle for the axe about 3 times just by moving my hand past it too fast, the rest of the paint job went absolutely fine, and obviously being super glue back on, absolutely fine. But loads of fun doing it. Let me know if you're thinking of picking up this miniature, and let me know if you're going to use any of the techniques I have done in this video.
Thank you very much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you Games Workshop for sending me the miniatures ahead of time. If you have enjoyed the video, please do drop a comment below, like the video, subscribe and all of that stuff. Check out the video description as well for all of my links and affiliates, including the channel sponsor, which is Counter Attack Bases. If you really want to support me, check out my Patreon as well, because it's really the best way of supporting me and helping me continue to make these videos. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.